And back up. There you go. Thank you. It's just like right in front of the camera.
Want to monitor my liquid uptake?
I mean, I don't mind, but I'm not sure that everyone else does. How's the new baby? Good.
Yeah, way happier than the other one.
How was the other one?
He's 18 months old. Affordable housing. And two-family residential. Two cities. There's so many places that large houses. And now the third that. Now there's family. Yeah, right. And I think that's what the thing is. You know, we have a regulation for multi-family, but it's got to be a town. But again, you could have all the single family converted to two-family. You know?
Okay, I have 7:32 Apple time. Is this recording? Oh no, I gotta wait.
It said it was recording, but it's not this recording.
Okay. Did Ashley head off somewhere?
He's coming back.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, are you all set? All right, everybody. Can everybody who's on Zoom hear us?
Yes, I can.
All right.
Loud and clear.
And we see a beautiful picture of Sid. Fantastic. All right, so I have 7:32. I'm going to call to order Woodstock's Planning and Zoning Commission special meeting, although all of our meetings are special, for May 5th, 2022. I'm going to go through a roll call. We'll first do commissioners who are here, and then we'll do commissioners who are joining with us via Zoom. Mark, do you mind starting us off with the roll call, please?
Certainly. Mark Blackmer.
Joseph Adeletta. Dean Gould.
Jeff Gordon.
Jeffrey Marcotte. Joe Bullock.
And then if we can go through commissioners who are on, I'll just say that you're here when I state your name. Doug Porter.
Second. Here.
Sid Blodgett.
Here.
David Morse.
Here.
And Dwight Reinowitz.
Here.
We have a quorum. Thank you, everybody. Designation of alternates. We need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Tim Young's not here yet. He told me he was going to attend, but right now we would need 2. Going in the order we've been going in, keeping track of it, would seat Dean. And would seat Dwight, based upon the listing that I have. If Tim Young arrives, then we'll deal with that accordingly. Pledge of Allegiance. Jeff Marcotte, would you mind doing the honor once again? Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Here, before I forget that, and yes, virtual. Okay. Now, Nancy Fraser told me she's not able to attend tonight. I think she's in New Orleans, so I'm sure she's having a much better time than we are here. So that takes us to Chair's report. My usual thank yous for all you commissioners for the work that we've we do at the meetings and also for staff, the work that gets done at meetings and in between the meetings. Our next meeting is our regular monthly business meeting, which is in 2 weeks, the 19th. The agenda will be in meeting packets will be set. Actually, it'll be next week, right, Ashley?
Yeah.
Yes. So we will work on that. So if anyone's unable to attend, let us know, and we can go accordingly. So that would then. Oh, okay. We'll note that Tim Young is here. So we'll have to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it looks like we'll need to unseat an alternate. So, based upon the rotation, it will look like that would be Dwight, if I have it correctly. Unless you're upset by that, Dwight.
I think I'll survive, Jeff.
All right. Well, if you need any medical care because you get very depressed, let me know. I can swing by your house.
Thank you. I'd appreciate a script.
We'll keep that out of the minutes. We'll do that off of town hall property, okay?
That one gets a photo.
Please.
Of Dwight. We just snapped a picture of you, Dwight, so that's going into the minutes, okay? Just to let you know. All right. The next then takes us to why we're here, which is the affordable housing plan update. We did get a updated draft copy of the affordable housing plan update, which is dated April 21st, 2022. I know you mailed it out to commissioners. Does everyone here have a copy, and commissioners on Zoom have a copy? We have a copy up on the screen that we can scroll through and go accordingly for that. So that is what we'll get into tonight. Just be mindful, we have a June 1st deadline with the state, which doesn't mean we have to get it, that we want to get it to them on June 1st. We like to get it, have enough time to be able to get everything wrapped up and finalized with whatever paperwork has to be done, you know, with it. Mark, you have your hand up. Did you have something?
Yeah, I move that we accept the latest draft. We approve this, and that way, hopefully, we can vote on this tonight to make sure we get this done in time.
So your motion would be to accept the affordable housing plan
As this
as
draft
presented, and with the understanding, I'm assuming that if we have a second, then the motion on the table would still allow for any discussion and things like that.
Right.
Okay. All right. Okay. So motion by Mark Blackmere, seconded by Jeff Marcotte. The motion is to accept the draft affordable housing plan. I'll just state the date for the record so it's clear which draft we're talking about. It's the April 21st, 2022 version, because I know we've had a number of versions. So thank you for dating these. So that puts the motion on the table, but the motion then on the table is for discussion, which basically then, without objection, gets into discussion then about the draft. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know you had some questions, and Delia then can answer your questions, and everybody then.
Good, that's fine.
If you wanted to start out with those, we can just
Sure.
go through them. I don't know if you wanted Delia to mention your questions and answer them, or if you wanted to raise them, whatever you wish, Joe.
I'll start with a question and certainly ask Delia to help me understand the question. And I'm just looking at data presented in different tables. And I understand that there's certainly a limited amount of data to draw from to create this information. But I wanted to bring to the commission's attention my concern about how the data is used to drive a conclusion, which makes sense. But if the data is questionable, we have to be aware of that. And I'll refer folks to page 44 and 45, which those are the two tables I'll be looking at. And on page 44, it's a housing gap analysis. The top table is for a family of 4.
Can you just hold for one quick second?
Sure,
I just wanna
until-
make certain we get
Yep.
it on the screen so
Yep.
everybody can see it, including any members of the public. So you said it was page 44?
Page 44.
Is the first one that you wanted
Right.
to look at. Sure. So we'll call that up. I would, so everybody can see easier. Is that the one, Joe?
Yes, it
Page
is.
40?
Yeah, those two tables.
Sure.
And they're titled as family of 4 household. That's the top table. The second table, the renter occupied units. In the second column, the max monthly rent, in parentheses, it says for a family of 4. So it took these two tables to mean for a family of 4. And it indicates under the supply column for both tables, the number of housing units that meet those financial constraints in the first column. And these were identified as information drawn from the American Community Survey and HUD. Where I'm going with this is looking at the demand column, which to me implies that's the demand in Woodstock for those type of units. And again, I'm not questioning the data in those columns. What I want to do is look at the supply numbers in those two tables, which is a family of 4, to compare it to the tables on page 45, which are single person household and single person rental. It says individual in the rental occupied units table. And the demand numbers, well, I'll start with the supply numbers. The supply numbers are different, showing presumably a different supply numbers for single person household and single renters. So those supply numbers are different for 4 family versus single person. But my concern starts where the demand numbers, though, for the single person household and the single person renter are the same numbers. And hence, in the single person household, we see significant gaps in the extremely low and very low numbers. And what I had written to Delia was essentially this kind of question. I also referenced page 33. There's a table called distribution of household size.
We'll pull that one up
Okay.
on the screen so everybody can see it. It was page 33, Joe?
Page 33.
Okay.
And that distribution of household size, the next to the last group of data says Woodstock 2019. And the bar chart shows, if you look at the colors, 1 person for blue and the others are as identified. So somehow there's a way to discern single person household sizes versus 2 person, 3 person, and 4 person. Again, that's all okay. I'm just concerned if there's a way to discern a single person for this table, but the table on page 45, we're still using numbers presumably for 4 person households instead of single person households and renters. It's drawing a conclusion that we're short 223 units. And that was a question to Delia. Am I reading this right? Is there something that we as a commission should put a notation that the numbers in the demand columns on both of these tables are the same numbers, even though the supply numbers are able to discern differences. And she's ready to answer me tonight. So after all of that.
You would like to answer, Joe?
Yeah, so if you'll note at the bottom of that table on page 33, distribution of household size, it references table S2501 in the ACS data. If I go online, it's not showing up right now. One moment. You'll see up here at the top, S2501.
Mhm.
That's the same table. That's where the data came from.
Okay.
And I have Connecticut showing here. And if you move the bar across, it shows Wyndham, and keep going and you see Woodstock. And on the left, it shows the size of the households. This data is not broken down by income. It just tells you the number of households you have in those sizes, or number of people who live there, not the size of the house, but the size of the family, the number of people, not the size of people, the number of people who live in the
Okay.
household. That doesn't break down by income, and it's, if you go down the data to other parts of the table, it doesn't have it by income. Now, I've looked many tables. There's probably far more tables than I can even count and keep track of in the census data. So I haven't come across the data that breaks down the data with the number of households, also further broken down by income. So the other table that I used, I just have to stop sharing for a second
Can I
to
just
get the other one.
interject one clarification? If this table S2501, which is shown on page 33, distribution of household size, would it make sense for a clarification to say that it's distribution of household size? I'm not questioning the data or the title, but for us to have some clarification is this data is, you know, it shows where you got it from. It breaks the data down by the distribution of household size, not based upon income brackets, to show that, to try to get to Joe's point of looking at some of this data, would it be helpful to put some clarification text to say,
Sure.
yes, you're looking at distribution of household size, but it's not showing
Regardless of
you
income.
regardless of income.
Sure.
So that way, getting to, I think one of your points was better understanding where these data points are coming from. Would that be helpful to put a clarification in
Yes,
for that on page 30?
for that on page 33. Okay.
And that can be easily put in then, Delia, to make certain people understand what the distribution of household size means. As Joe is saying, when you start looking at some of these other tables and trying to look
That
between.
Okay.
So, okay.
This is where the other source of the data comes from, the Office of Policy Development and Research. And they have something called CHAS tables. That's the Consolidated Planning. You have to do housing affordability strategy data. And so you have to have it all set up, but you have to go and choose the time frame. It's an MCD, and then Connecticut and Woodstock. And so here's the data for Woodstock. It breaks it down by income, not by household size. And if you go down, it doesn't go in the rest of the table. It goes on to tell you how many households have problems. It doesn't go on to anything else.
Right.
So I didn't have a source of data that broke down the number of households also by the income that they have. Be nice if I had that, but I couldn't find any data like that.
So if I can just ask one follow-up, then a corollary. If the tables that Joe is mentioning on page 44 to 45, would it be helpful to have something that, just for clarification, even if people don't necessarily pay much attention to the income group column, just to have it clarified that this is indeed broken up by income? So it's just clearer.
Sure.
As far as what is the data you're looking at? Would that be helpful for clarification, Joe, or is it more?
I'm not sure it's
themselves?
clarifying it because my point is that in both of those, on both of those pages, the tables can discern differences in supply for all the categories. On 44, it's different numbers under the supply column for household and renters than the supply numbers on page 45 for household and renters. So there's some method that's used to come up with those numbers. However, apparently there's not the data to discern the difference in the demand numbers. So we use the same demand numbers for a 4-family versus a single family. And then it drives the conclusion on the last page that we're 223 units short. And, you know, I understand there's limitation to the data. I just think it's important to note that these demand numbers are the same, and maybe in the conclusion that we have a clause that says the 223 number is the result of using data that's only allows for demand numbers to be the same for 4-family versus single family or 4-person.
And where, just so we can see that.
The conclusion is on page 61.
There it is.
With affordable housing gap up to 223 units for very low would meet the need over time.
So you're saying,
And I think that-
clarification, put something in there?
Yeah, because that's, to me, it's a little misleading because it sounds like an absolute number when we're using numbers. And again, Delia, I recognize you have a limitation to where you can draw data from, but where everything else seemed to be fairly specific and discerning single family, 4-family, single renter, 4-family member renters, these demand numbers end up being the same. And that throws off our numbers.
Would it be helpful where there's that, you have it up on the screen there, Delia, where it begins a couple sentences down that says with the affordable housing gap as of 2019 data. Would it be helpful, Joe, to either keep where it says at up to 223 units for very low and extremely low income populations, or get rid of that number and have something more clarification based upon, I don't know, there's some limitations of of the data.
And I think maybe removing the absolute number and leave it as an opportunity to increase the number of very low and extremely low population.
So it's more of a general thing and not put the number in that people say, oh, the data is absolutely saying 223 units. So when you get to 223 units, you've met it, but take into account then the limitation of the data, what you're pointed out, which is a good point. So if we were to get rid of where it says at up to 223, up to 223 units, would it just be more of the affordable housing gap as of 2019 data for very low and extremely low income populations, and not even say 223?
I'd be more comfortable with that unless there's more specific data that I'm not seeing that can justify that number.
We could take out that number and then make reference to the page and include that the data isn't broken down the same way. Like one set of data is broken down by number of households, and the other set of data is broken down by income, and they're not.
Any way to draw attention to the fact that some of the numbers are the same, or the demand numbers are the same in all the tables.
So we can put that clarification on pages 44 and 45 that as a note that we've recognized that the demand numbers and whatever those columns are in those two pages are the same numbers. So that way people are aware if they're going to try to do their own calculations.
And if I could add the same numbers because no data was available to have a different set of numbers.
And that would be helpful for clarification.
Right.
So you would be okay if we put that, say, on page 44 and 45.
Yes.
So whichever page you look at, if you don't look at both.
Right.
It shows the same clarification on both.
That would be good.
And then on the conclusion, would you, to follow up on your point, if we said, what's already in there with the affordable housing gap as of 2019 data, and then get rid of at up to 223 units, get rid of those words,
yeah.
keep everything else.
Right.
And that way we're not tied into a particular number given the limitation of the data.
And particularly the way people read something like this, you know, you see that number and that's what's talked about. We
That can
need
become a
200,
goal.
that becomes the goal. And I'm not sure that that's real, particularly if they're not deed restricted, we could make 500 units. And unless they're deed restricted, it really wouldn't count towards affordable housing. So,
So those changes would get then to the questions you ask and the clarification to make it easier for us to understand, but any member of the public get those things in that. Would that then address those points then?
that would, yes.
So let me just ask then if any other commissioner has any questions or comments about those items that we just discussed. Is I'll get to the people on our commissioners who are on Zoom, but anything here from any commissioners relative to those points that were raised for clarification? Is that okay? Did you have something, Mark, about that?
Yeah, I mean, taking the number off, was under the impression that I didn't know if we would need to approve every data. I mean, not picking on Joe here, but there's more data tables, and like Joe said, you come up with things. Is this plan to approve the exact numbers of the data plan? Or are we, you know, like Joe said, you know, we've got the 223 units. So is that a goal? We have to make 223 units. That is our goal. And
Well, wouldn't then be
we're there, or is the goal to, you know, pursue the different, whether it be senior housing units? You know, is that 223 isn't showing, is that for senior housing? Is that which one of these lines is?
Well,
We would
guess-
take-
Getting rid of 223,
Right.
a good idea.
but all of the other points here are still goals
Yes.
as recommendations. And
Correct.
that would still hold.
Yep. Okay. Let me just ask commissioners on Zoom, as far as, does anybody have any questions or comments? If you don't have any, that's fine, relative to what we've just discussed about these clarification points that we've just discussed. Are you guys okay with what we've been discussing? I want to make certain I include you in if there's anything you want to add to the matter right now that we've just discussed. Sid?
Yeah, I agree with Joe that without better data, we really shouldn't be drawing quantitative conclusions. We can make some qualitative statements. I think we're doing that, but until we get better numbers, I wouldn't want to have us stick our necks out and put a number out there.
And that's a very good point. And sometimes it's just limitations of the data that you have to go.
Right.
If at some later point, there's other data that comes out, it doesn't stop us from a later point of reviewing that and making any future decisions. So, okay. Was there anything from I don't know, Doug or David or Dwight, if there was, I don't want to miss you guys, if there was anything you wanted to add about what we just discussed, or if you're okay with it?
I don't have any comment at this time, Jeff.
Okay. All right.
I'm all set too.
All right.
Yeah, I'm all set.
Thank you. I didn't know if you had anything more with your questions. You know,
Nope.
you had asked, so I didn't want to go on to anything else.
No,
unless
you
had anything more you needed to address with those questions.
Not for mine. I think the way we've discussed it
Okay.
sounds good.
Thank you for bringing those up, Joe. Well, we just did. I'll re-note them, so that way it's very clear.
What page?
So page 33. For that bottom graph that says distribution of household size. I'll let you call it up so before I start. So 33. Yes, so that one right there. I don't know, we didn't have a problem with the title, but we will want to have some clarification text that says that this is data not based upon was it income brackets or whatever, or income.
Put it as a note underneath.
I would, so that way it's clear that, you know, it is data based only on only on household sizes, not upon income. Right. That's basically what that graph is. Right.
I can't read what she's writing.
She's writing on no
Sorry about that.
data is based on household size, not income. Okay. Is that good? That will be good enough clarification then for that. Page 44, it will be the same for page 45 because we'll use the same clarification. We wanted to put some type of clarification text that says the columns that are listed demand are using the same, the data available uses the same number for family of 4 household as it does for single person household. That was the column, right?
Correct.
Joe?
Correct.
That we would use that same clarification under each one of those tables to show that no matter which column you look at on those 2 pages, it's the same numbers. Yeah, flag it.
What do you want to say?
Well, would it make sense just to say that the data presented in the demand column based upon available data is the same, is listed, as is reported as the same for a family of 4 household as it is for single person household, something like that? Just to show that that's the data reported.
That was available.
And that's, yeah, the available reported data. And we would put that on under each one of these tables on each one of the pages. So say data presented in demand column.
Was the best information available, or?
Yeah, is the best information available. And
Despite being the same. Despite being the same.
Yeah, despite being the same numbers for family of 4 as single person household.
Right.
And we would put that on under each table in each of those 2 pages.
Right, except call it renter for the bottom columns.
Yes,
that,
we
right.
would do that.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Correct. So what you put there, you can copy and paste it to that same table in a sense on the next page.
Down here as well, right?
Yeah, but Joe's point is you'd have to say instead of
yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, it would be. You're right.
No change.
It wouldn't be. Yes, correct. Except when you go to the next page. So when we go to the next page, we have to say, instead of saying it's the same as for single person household, we have to say it's the same as for a family of 4 household. Is that clarified enough?
Hey, Jeff,
I think Sid has a comment.
Yeah. I just want to ask,
So
is that
I
clarified
think
enough for what
that
you were?
that's very helpful if people end up reading it, as opposed to just looking for red and green numbers, you know, but that's what we have.
Sid, did you have something on this clarification or was it something else?
on these tables, will we keep the values as they are now in the demand and the supply dash demand columns, or will they be blank?
Well, wouldn't we have to put them in to show because that's the data presented, or do we have a clarification, or what do we do?
Or maybe say NA. I mean, if we know it's for a family of 4 or a family of
Yeah,
4
we don't
renters, and that's known information, and the single family, we don't know, put NA.
Or do we not
Or-
even show those columns?
Or not, yeah.
Not show those columns at all?
Well, keep the column, but have the number. I mean, trying to relate it back and forth, but with no numbers in the demand column.
Yeah, I like the phrase best information available, but that's all we ever deal with, really, is best information available. I think what we have, though, is beyond that or not even worth showing.
Yeah, because if we have to explain this to, you know, a public hearing or other people in the community, then we have to kind of go back and forth with this.
So I guess,
Oh, we
This is
just
the
call
best.
Delia.
Don't worry.
so are you saying, Sid, I want to make certain I'm clear, show this data or not show this data?
Well, I kind of put the question out there for the commission. If I guess I'd be leaning towards not showing the data, like either NA or unavailable or to be determined, or
Yeah.
and at that point, it can hopefully draw the reader to the footnote that states somewhere that we can't really draw a conclusion. We don't have the numbers.
So keep that column that says supply demand, but instead of the numbers put in to be determined, or?
Well, if the supply column has data from a known source, and they are different numbers for a family of four and a single person household. So somehow there's the ability to discern those numbers. But I think what Sid is saying, and I'm agreeing, if this is what he's saying, in the demand column for the single person household and single person renter, instead of putting the numbers, put NA or TBD or not available.
What do you think about that, Delia, as far as
So you
look
would
at
do
these
it
numbers?
under single person, but you wouldn't do it under four person?
Well, I guess I'll ask you, how are the numbers developed? Are those 4-person numbers from the ACS?
I don't know. They have a much more involved table, but I guess it's incredibly complicated and it has codes. I don't know all the codes.
Okay.
So I haven't looked at that table. But those are the charts that the State Department of Housing uses. And I don't have any better data. Like I said, I can show you where it says it's in B25063, that's the ACS table. I can show you that table and how I came up with the supply. The ACS, the American Community Survey, has the numbers of how many houses you have in your town of each value. And I broke them down by the categories and added them up. So I'm the one who came up with their 53 rental units of this value or less. And then I figured out how many from 901 to 541.
Okay.
So I came up with those numbers based on that table, the B25063
Yep.
in the ACS. But
the demand is
the
different.
demand is what came from the Chaz table, the one I showed you.
Yeah.
And did that table have the family size?
No,
For that,
it's
it
broken
didn't.
down by income. It doesn't tell you.
Yeah.
I still have it up if you want me to stop sharing this and go back to it if you want, but it doesn't show size of household. It shows how many households in each income bracket.
Okay.
Because you could have a single person who makes a lot of money because they have a good job. So it's not like you can't assume that single people are going to have a lower income. You could have a
Right.
4-person family that has very low income and a single person that has a very high income. They're not breaking the data down based on how many people in each income category have how many people in their household.
So let me just get back to what Sid had thrown out as a comment is if there's this issue with this data and what Joe has mentioned about the demand column numbers being the same on the 2 pages, do we want to have any of this data on there, understanding that it's actually going to be confusing? And you're right, you have to explain it, what's up with this, or not show it so as not to create confusion. If we're not able to really draw a specific number conclusion, more a general conclusion, as you know, as has been said, instead of something that we're quantifying, it's more qualitative. So do we, on those 2 pages, is it hurt or help us to have those things? I'll Tim and then Delia.
I guess concerning if we're going to take this data, which has where it was derived from here, and we alter it and put non-applicable in there or not available or to be determined, when somebody can go somewhere and look this up and that data's there, then why did we put what was what they just looked up? We're contradicting the data. This is the data, but we've edited it. We either got to put the data in or take the data out. But to alter it, I just don't think it's the correct thing to do.
Delia?
I would think you could continue using it, but instead of saying for note 2, which I hope is clear enough up there, it's a little blurry maybe, it says data presented is in demand column is the best information available, despite being the same as provided for a 4-person household. I changed that note to say that the CHAS data provides their income-based data regardless of household size. Like you're still using it, you're accounting for, you have something showing there,
right,
and you're showing that it's not broken down by household size. And it's the best data that I could come up with.
Sid, let me just throw this back at you. What do you think about that? To show this, not show this, put more clarification text in? I guess the issue is how confusing or non-confusing would it be if we didn't put this data in or did put the data in? Because we have 2 columns that are coming, each one coming from a different source, right, Delia?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts further about that?
Well, for now, I'm still leaning toward NA or TBD or unavailable or something where wherever the data is that is just we're not comfortable with. And at that point, it can be footnoted with an explanation simply saying what we're just talking about now. It's coming from different sources, or yes, the best we have, but we don't have a lot of faith in it.
Joe?
If I can throw out another suggestion, instead of calling it a housing gap analysis for all of these tables, calling it a housing analysis and drop the demand columns altogether and just show the supply. Because the supply number sounds, at least it's been evaluated by Delia pretty quantitatively.
Demand numbers which come from the CHAS data, the problem, the confusion is they're presenting the same numbers,
right,
for 4 versus 1
right
household.
So this is supposed to be the gap analysis. What are we missing? If we don't try and do a gap analysis right now, we just do the analysis, identify the housing types, and drop the demand column altogether.
We would also drop the supply demand column.
Right, the last 2 columns.
And not call it housing gap analysis, but call it housing analysis, you said?
Yeah. I mean, it would be nice to know the gap, but unless we can develop the gap from fairly competent numbers, I hate to put something out that's we have to explain all the time.
And the other is, if this is just the limitation of the way the data is, it's the limitation of the way the data is. At some later point, if there's data more refined or the data gets updated and presented in additional ways that then makes a housing gap analysis better to be performed, nothing stops us from updating it.
Right.
Just because we have to meet the June 1st deadline per state law doesn't mean we can't be updating things later if Delia comes back to us, say, in a year and says, hey, they've updated data, and now they have even more data tables, and, take a look at it, so nothing would stop us later, wouldn't set it in stone. Well, let me ask, let me throw it right back at Sid, then I'll open it up for everybody else. Sid, if we were to make those changes that Joe mentioned, housing analysis, and get rid of demand and supply demand columns, does that make things less confusing? And what are your thoughts relative to that?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. And again, my impression about this whole project is that the state is on this fishing expedition, having each city and town in the state put together a plan, submit it, and I don't think they expect Woodstock or any other community to have all excellent data and come up with some conclusions. if our plan shows that there's missing information, I think hopefully that'll jump out at whoever's reviewing this at the state level and maybe provide that data to us in the next round of planning. But it's simply a plan, and we don't have all the right numbers. And I'd rather err on the side of I'd rather not draw conclusions based on inadequate data. And just leave it like Joe is suggesting, drop a column, change a heading to clarify that.
So if we were to, so right now, if we were to say, get rid of the word gap on both page 44, 45, get rid of the last two columns on each one of those tables, we'd also have to get rid of the bottom text. Housing gap, negative housing gap, positive housing gap, because we're not going to be showing a gap. But just show the data otherwise, income group, max home value, and supply. We would also have to get rid of the double asterisk, because we wouldn't then be having a demand column.
Right.
And just show the data. Would we still want to keep that note that we put in? Well, actually, we wouldn't need to, because we would get rid of we would get rid of everything in the double asterisk, because that would go away.
I'm not opposed to a gap analysis if we have numbers that we can rely on, but I'm not confident in these numbers.
Let me ask other commissioners, what are your thoughts about that, including commissioners on Doug, then David?
I think it's important to have some of this information. I don't disagree with what Sid and Joseph are saying. My inclination is to do away with the single household tables totally. In my experience, and maybe it's my bias, I'm not overly worried about single people and housing affordability. I think I'm much more concerned with families and how we have available housing for families. And if the information is a difficulty because we have this single person household and then we have the 4-person household, and we're struggling to get that information for the single person household, just do away with those tables and then just show the demand as all households, regardless of size, that fall within those income brackets. And I think it's important to show this, that what we think our supply is and what our demand is based on whatever numbers we can get. But to just remove those tables, I think is not correct. And I find them interesting, and I worry that someone's going to take these and say, okay, you need to provide more housing in this area. Well, then let's be prepared to respond to that. But we need to have some statistical information here to present where we are. Just to delete them, I think, is a mistake.
I guess we weren't talking about deleting the entirety of the tables, just the demand part, but you're saying try to change it. So instead of saying family of 4 or single, I don't know, is there data, Delia, for all housing supply and all housing demand?
The Chaz data has a total column.
Are you able to show that up there so we can see the numbers?
Well, this may be something for Delia would have to come back. I think it's difficult to put a data person in a position where they have to find data quickly, because these tables are complicated.
Well, just this way we can at least see what table we would be referencing. But those are numbers. These are numbers for, so we already have here total for owner, total for renter.
The problem is this income data doesn't get broken down by household size.
But I was just following up, Doug, were you saying try to show a table that doesn't break it up by family size, just show total supply, total demand?
I certainly, that would be something we could look at. I'm more inclined to look at the, and I don't know the data, so I can't tell you what's in this data branch of the data that's available. But I think the biggest problem I have is having the single family, the single household information create this problem. Do away with the single household. Now, if Delia thinks there's good information that shows total households, that's fine. But I think there's some way we should show where we are in some kind of an analysis of supply and demand.
David?
I was just concerned we're trying to use data from two different sources that doesn't line up. I mean, Delia's doing a great job trying to make this mesh, but it's hard to use data from two different sources that's using two different standards and making it line up. I think that's a lot of our problem. Now, either we cause it a housing analysis, like Joseph said, and I think that would be fine, or we just do analysis like Doug was mentioned of, and not, because I mean, the numbers being the same is just, that can't be. I mean, I know that where the data came from, but that doesn't make sense that in a small town like this, those numbers would be exactly the same. So I think that's misleading, and it's giving us false information that's could potentially come back to bite us. And like Sid said, it's a qualitative, we need to do more of a qualitative analysis than a quantitative with the numbers, if we can't make if the numbers don't line up like that.
There was something you wanted to add?
They're both from ACS. It's just that department that made the CHAS data took the ACS data, because they probably have access to tables that I don't, and provided the data this way. So I think it would make a better statement. One moment, I'm going to bring back the other document.
Sorry, Delia, I couldn't quite hear you. Can you repeat what you're suggesting?
I haven't got to it yet. I think if you went back to show the tables the way they are, and then in your conclusion, explain that because the Comprehensive Housing Affordability Survey, which is the CHAS data, and the supply information, which is directly from ACS, is not broken down the same way. You could show how it's very difficult to determine what the gap is, but you would at least show that you have information and you tried to do it. You could say it shows this, but we don't agree with that because it doesn't break it down the same way.
Well, let me play devil's advocate. If we did that, is that going to confuse people? Because then what happens? I mean, if I'm looking at this, I may just say, I don't really want to look at all these tables. I'm just going to look at the gap. Oh, gee, there's some gap numbers here. And it looks like we need to get to X number of housing. Well, that's my conclusion, which would be very easy for someone just to do, and likely what some people will do, you know, saying, oh, we have to get to 223 or whatever. Well, that's the basic conclusion of the gap analysis. I don't want to look at the rest of the numbers because I just want to look at what the end number is, and that's what it is. And I'm just going to assume that's what you have to get to. And oh, by the way, that has to now be a goal. Whereas it may, based upon the data we have, then that really isn't an accurate number. No fault to you, Delia. It's a fault of the data sets available. So I guess the issue is if we wanted to do some type of housing analysis to not make it confusing, to me, showing that type of gap is going to be confusing based upon the limitations of the data from CHAS and the demand columns.
I'm thinking that Doug's suggestion of maybe eliminating the single person household and single person renter information is useful, and just keep the family of four, because that's also a family of four is referenced on an earlier table to get the 79,000 area median income for a family of four. So it at least is trying maybe consistent information. We use financial information for a family of four. We have a gap analysis for a family of four and a renter family of four, and leave the information the way it is, but essentially eliminate page 45.
Joe, Flu, if
Yeah,
you had a
I
question.
agree with that entirely, and I think a footnote should be made that under supply that the supply varies depending if it's a 1, 2, or 3 person household.
Well, this would be specific for a family of 4 households.
I understand that, but there could be an asterisk in that supply demand column saying that the supply varies for 1, 2, and 3 household people.
So let me throw that out then. What do we feel about getting rid of page 45 and just having an analysis which is on page 44, which is family of 4 household?
And still call it a gap analysis, so keep everything.
Still, yeah.
Yeah, because
Yes.
it is a gap. Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
I also think that in our conclusion that we should avoid using hard numbers because that's what people are going to read. They're going to read the conclusion. They're going to read the first page. They're going to read the last page. And I think we should just, if they want to know the hard numbers, they can go into the data and look at it. And we should just say that we know we have a deficit of affordable housing and, you know, let them go through the data so that we're not giving them like a number they can go through and say, you said in your conclusion, you need this many houses, this much housing. So that our conclusion is just qualitative, not quantitative. Like, I think that Sid had a great point there, so that we don't get tied into a number in the conclusion. If they want to, if somebody really wants to get into this, they can go through the data and look at the tables and read the footnotes. And then if they don't like what we did, they can come back to us and we can say, we were working with the best data we had. This is where we are. I mean, I think this whole thing is hard for us as a rural town to do. And I think putting a hard number in the conclusion is not a good idea.
And we had talked about getting rid of the hard number in the conclusion, to get rid of it for that, which I'll get back to a follow-up on that. But just for right now, the discussion would be getting rid of page 45. Of course, all the page numbers will change. And keeping what we have already as presented then, without some of the changes that we talked about, the strike-throughs, but what was presented in the document to us, keeping what page 44 is. Doug, I know you had raised some questions about some of this. Would that then be okay with you if we were just to keep page 44 and not page 45, just the family of 4 household data?
Was that directed to me, Jeff?
I was just following up because you had mentioned about a concern you had about
that would be fine.
Household.
Yeah, that would be fine with me. I think I understand where Joseph's coming from. And as I mentioned, my bias is more towards families. So if we have data that's reasonably presented for the family information, it's less confusing, not having the single person household, I would be all for that.
Okay. That would mean that, Delia, any of the stuff that you have struck through, we would still keep. Right? We wouldn't change page 44 then?
Well,
or would we?
Does it take it references single person, right?
Well,
wait a minute.
Yes, that data point number 2, you know, the note number 2 would have to go away. But I'm talking about still calling it housing gap analysis.
Yes.
Yeah, just number 2, note number 2.
So this whole page, single person would go away, right?
Single person would go away.
We don't worry about the notes.
No, but I'm talking about the page up above. Family of 4 household. See where it says note number 2?
Yep. Just delete it.
That just has to be deleted.
Well, wait a minute. Data is the best information available. I would drop despite, keep that first part and drop that clause. Yeah.
Okay. And that way it's showing it's the best available.
Right. And we understand it's not necessarily tying together because
you have to do that up above as well. Yeah. Okay. That's fine. And then just one follow-up then that I would have is when we, in the conclusion page where we said we were going to get rid of you know, the number that says at up to 223 units. We, and I'll wait for Delia to get to that page once she's got done whatever you need to do, Delia. So that way, it'll be the very, very last.
Just want to put a note.
Delete that page. This also gets to a point I know we've raised a number of times is the state's wanting like a town like Woodstock to try to do these analysis, but if the data limits us, it's tough, which gets to some of the problems the state is creating, trying to force using certain data or trying to do some of these analyses given limitations that the data has. Separate from what a rural town could do versus say a city or a suburb. But if we go to the very last, so where we struck out there where it says up to 223 units, and it continues on saying for very low and extremely low income populations. And then it says a modest amount of. Do we want to get rid of that? Because then someone could ask, how do we come up with a modest amount? Do we just want to say new affordable units each year would meet the need over time? Because if we put in modest amount, that's somewhat of a quantification. And we're getting rid of the 223 number. So my only concern is, what do we mean by modest amount? That modest amount, I think, was referencing 223 units. I'm just asking if that what we want to do, clarifying that.
So get rid of the words a modest amount of.
Yes.
And just start with new affordable housing units each year.
Yes. Because someone can ask us, what do you mean by modest? But we're not able to easily quantify it. How do we come up with the adjective modest? Because then to me, it doesn't have any meaning if we've gotten rid of 223 units. If that makes sense to
So
people.
is that showing what you would get rid of?
Right, does that make sense to people?
Yes.
Doug?
So you're gonna keep the.
Oh, just one thing, Mark. Doug and then Mark.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, but I might even go further and just say, with the affordable housing gap as of 2019 data, there is a need for new affordable housing units, period.
Yeah.
And get rid of for very low and extremely low income populations, just say there is a need for, okay.
And saying, you know, you're not telling us when we need to do it. We're not telling how many, we're just saying there is a need.
Okay, I understand. So actually the sentence would read, with the affordable housing gap as of 2019 data, there is a need for new affordable housing units each year.
Period.
No, I would get rid of each year and just say, period.
Oh, okay.
Oh, new affordable housing units and just end it there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. What do people think about that? Is that? Yes. There's a need for new affordable housing units and get rid of each year as well. Is that where you would end it, Doug? For new affordable housing units, period.
You're muted, Doug.
I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, Doug's muted and he doesn't know it.
There he is.
So which one of you muted me? No.
Well, we have a special.
I think all of us. Yeah, I think all of us would agree. There's a need based on the definition of affordable housing from the state. There's a need for more units, but we're not saying how many. We're not saying what time frame. We're just saying yes, we understand there's a need. Now, as a planning commission and a community, we can decide how to address that need over what time period.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm actually fine with that because I think that really gets to more. Yes. Yes, the period goes there. Okay, I think that makes sense. Okay. Do we, Mark? You had something? Or that address it?
That does address it. I'm good with that.
We'll make a note that we've made Mark happy. We've achieved one of the goals for tonight's meeting. We don't have to make you any happier.
Gain.
I just want to make sure I didn't miss any other one. Was there any other commissioners on Zoom that I missed the hands up? I just want to make certain I didn't. Okay. Anything else? I know we've gone through a lot on stuff already before. And in this draft deal, you put in all the stuff that at last meeting we wanted to put in. Did you have something, Delia?
I can't remember the note. We changed.
Let me take a look. Yes, did you make the change? On page 33? If not, we can state again what that change is. Be on the bottom. We were going to put something in.
Yeah, you have the note.
Yes,
I
that
just
is.
didn't remember what we wrote.
That's what we wanted to put in, right?
Yes.
Let me open it up then. Anything else additional? Yes, Joe?
Yeah, under conclusions and recommendations, I keep coming back to this.
Yep.
Our infrastructure or lack thereof.
Mm-hmm.
In order to have more affordable housing, we have to have housing that's associated with public water and sewer. And I would like to see something in there under conclusions and recommendations about the expansion of the sewer system and expansion of a water system.
We did put that in here. We have it in page 51 and 52. You want to have something also put into conclusions and recommendations?
Yes. Yeah.
To say,
I think we've tied our, maybe I'm reading this wrong, but our Water Pollution Control Authority,
on page
what have
52.
they done? Tied our own hands to it?
Well, on page 52, we did put in here about the Woodstock Water
Yeah,
Pollution
but what
Control.
did they do? Tie their own hands?
Well, they've had that sewer avoidance policy for many, many years.
In other words, they tied their own hands.
If you wanted to change it, there'd be many steps involved, but you could recommend it if that's what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
You'd
I
also
would
have to
recommend that they
renegotiate
untie
with
their
Putnam.
hands.
You'd also have to renegotiate with Putnam to increase.
Exactly.
Although there is
But
a
that's,
leak,
you know,
once
we
they
can't do
fix
that.
their leaks, maybe they'll come up with, you know, maybe the leak is bigger than they think, or maybe there's more infiltration than they thought. Because if they fix the pipes that are allowing water to seep into it, maybe they could allow for, you know, more units to be added, because maybe the leak is larger than they think.
But that's not what they want. In fact, I know the chair of WPCA had specifically wanted to make certain that we were aware that they are not looking for us to give a recommendation to expand the water sewer infrastructure. That they are wanting to keep it as it is and not expand it. And they want to keep that water sewer expansion prohibition in place.
Mm-hmm.
That's ultimately up to them or what the town wants. I'm not certain. I wouldn't want to be putting something in that says we propose to expand it, because that would be contrary to what they are recommending and what
I'm
has
not
been
saying
policy.
we're proposed to do it. I'm saying we're looking into the possibility.
I'll open up to what others think, but I would just caution that that could raise concerns with WPCA.
Of course.
But Tim?
Could we put something in there that being that as a conclusion that perhaps we need more units, or we need to look at more units, but there are limitations with the present sewer and water availability, which would be crucial or mandatory to creating affordable housing. So one has to go with the other. And under the present rulings, the way things are right now, we can't go any further. So that's where what we've concluded. We aren't making any recommendations. We aren't saying that we're looking into anything, but we have concluded that that's where we stand right now. And that's one of the reasons why it's not getting any bigger.
Well, do we want to put then something in that could follow what you were saying is we already have the identified potential opportunities. Do we want to put something in succinctly underneath that said the identified limitations, and we just say, we don't have to rehash everything on page 51, 52. We can say public sewer, public water, transit, whatever we've listed, and say, here are the limitations, not saying we advocate expanding public sewers, now building a public water infrastructure, but just state, here are the identified limitations, and just keep it at that. Not have to get into much else, because we've already commented on page 51, 52 about limitations, which is really infrastructure.
Make it a conclusion and not.
Hey, Jeff,
Correct. Just say here,
Conclusion.
underneath, just say the identified limitations include.
Yep.
And then just say.
Yep.
Public sewer, public water, public transit. And then just keep it at that.
That's okay.
And a couple things.
Yeah.
One thing is, within the existing sewer district, you have some properties that are paying, are not connected, and you have some properties that are not developed. So they're usually owned by the Ag Society. So the Ag Society decided to sell them, they could be developed and connected because they're still in the district. And of course, they would add the flow, and that might be a separate issue, but you could sort of like reiterate that there are these limitations and say, should these limitations be addressed in the future, other opportunities might present. Like if the town decided to increase the sewer district, then that would present other opportunities. Not that you're recommending it, but you're pointing out how there are limitations, and many of those are outside your control.
Well, that's why we just
There's
put
so many
something
other
in.
things involved in the sewer district. You'd have to convince the town to go to the Putnam to try to renegotiate, and the Putnam would have to agree. They could say no.
Why don't we just simply say the identified limitations include, and we can just list, very simply, just say what we've already listed on page 51, 52, just say here, the identified limitations include public sewer, public water.
A, B, C, D, and
Right.
Yep.
Public transit, mixed uses, walkability.
Yeah, but I'm with you too, Jeff, and a lot of people are just gonna pick up this report on the last page.
They will, they may. So just say, these are the limitations, and just put that in the conclusion, and not say whether we're advocating to get rid of these limitations or not to get rid of limitations, just say, these are the limitations.
Right. Exactly.
We've said, here are opportunities, here are limitations. And then if someone wants to say, well, what more can we do to get more housing? We can say, well, then at that point, you're going to need to talk with the town about what you're going to do with some of these limitations, which becomes something a bit beyond what we as a commission can do. We have no authority over WPCA or, building a public water infrastructure. Would that then get to the point you were making about, so in the sense we would have something, another one just say, was it the identified limitations include, and then A is sewer, B is public water. You just list it that way, Joe?
Yeah, I haven't
listed
listed out,
public
but
infrastructure.
just
yeah, take those.
about the infrastructure limitations.
Take each one of those and list them as A, B, C, and D.
The ones in parentheses under that, like you said, sewers is A, B is public water, C is transit, D is mixed uses.
Well, mixed uses is under this commission's control.
Okay.
Right, but it doesn't mean that we
Right.
can still identify it as a
Right.
limitation. Doesn't mean we're going to ignore it. So I would just say, I think the list is on page 51.
Yeah.
So just say the identified limitations include, but may not be limited to the following, right? And then just go A, B, C down. And that would get to your point that they look at the conclusion, they see the opportunity, but then they have to be realistic about limitations. If they want to get around the limitations, then that engenders a much different discussion.
Right.
Especially if it has nothing to do with the future. It's not our control. They'd have to go to WPC in the town to say, what do you want to do about expanding the sewer? That's a whole analysis beyond us.
Mr. Chairman.
Appointed positions.
WPCA is.
So basically it comes back to the selectmen to make the decision, I guess.
WPCA has some authority. What do you want? Well, just say sewer. What, public sewers?
Because you don't have any public water. That's what I was thinking.
No, but that's a limitation. Public sewers, public water, I mean, that's a limitation. It's in.
Or municipal sewer,
You're saying
municipal
public
water, those are more
Well,
common
that's what
terms.
we already have on page 51.
Right.
Yeah, but I go on to explain about how there is no.
Yeah, but that's a limitation.
Right.
Right. It's private water, which is from wells, but there's public water, meaning the town doesn't maintain a public water distribution system like a city does. So I would just say public sewers, public water, what would it be, public transit? That's really what we're talking about, not private transit. Mixed uses. And walkability, because those are the things that were just listed in page 51. We don't have to get into detail because it's already in the text.
I think someone was.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Somebody was on or not.
The fairgrounds hooked up to it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Did I miss somebody on Zoom?
Yes, you have.
Yes, David?
Well, no, both Doug and Sid have been waving their hands.
Okay, I haven't seen it because we don't see it readily unless. But,
Well,
all right.
I'll zip it. Go ahead, Doug.
And
Thanks,
Sid's
Sid.
been waiting longer.
All right, go ahead, Sid.
I think everybody, I think, is in agreement that the discussion about public sewer and public water is something we want to explore at some other time. The pros and cons of each, because it may have, more effects on our community than just affordable housing. So I'm suggesting we just put it on your to-do list and we'll get to it some other time.
Yes, and that would also have to engender then having discussions with other town agencies. But if we list it just as bullet items, just to say, here are the limitations.
Yep.
Then you're right, that can be something later that can be looked into, but that's going to be a multifaceted, multi-agency series of discussions if someone wants to pursue that. Doug, did you have your hand up, then David?
I agree with Sid. I really don't want to go into public sewers and public water. Thompson is running into an issue of having, they had a vote to dissolve their planning and zoning commission based on the number of chickens. If we suggest
by vote.
Yes. If we want to suggest extending public sewers, I would imagine the vote to get rid of the planning and zoning commission will be pretty quick.
Well, I agree with you, Doug. I wouldn't want to advocate that either.
Yeah. But there's a long historical precedent that they don't want to expand the sewers, and I wouldn't touch it. I also don't
list it as a limitation
want to encourage.
Last page?
Well, we have two fairly large projects that provide a significant amount of attainable housing that are not on sewers. We have Cornfield Point, and we have, now I'm going to forget the other, Woodstock Meadows. Those are fairly intensive uses of their sites, but they do their septic system on their site because it's a well-drained gravelly soil. They both have community water systems. So it doesn't have to be a public water system, but we are, as I mentioned last night at a meeting I was at, Woodstock is sitting on an aquifer. We have the water available to service more than a single house with one well. So I keep hearing people wanting to extend the public systems that we have in Putnam. I don't think we have to even talk about that. I think we have an opportunity to develop affordable or attainable housing in Woodstock using the natural resources that we have here. And the last thing I want is to have a large 10-story building put up that sits on the sewer line and a water line that has a variety of housing units in it. That's not in the character that I think any of us are looking for in Woodstock. We clearly want to provide affordable or attainable housing for our residents, but I don't think we want to see an urban solution brought to our rural town.
Jeff had to step out for a minute, so I'll just jump in. So you're suggesting we delete item A and B on those identified limitations? Doug?
You're muted again, Doug. We can't hear you.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why we're showing limitations at all. I think that there's enough limitations within the topography of Woodstock, within our zoning regulations right now, that I don't know what this adds to it.
But, well, I think it adds
I think East Woodstock's very walkable.
Sorry. Go ahead, Doug. Sorry.
Don't you, Joseph, you and I and Sid, we all live in Woodstock. In East Woodstock, would you not consider East Woodstock walkable?
Well, it's not walkable if you need to get
Not to
groceries.
get to a store or a doctor or a job or a restaurant. I mean, certainly they can walk around for exercise.
Is there any way we're going to address the walkability in Woodstock, which is the second largest town in the state? Are we going to put sidewalks everywhere? I don't know what this adds to our analysis of affordable housing.
Well, let me ask this then. If we just say, we've already identified on page 51 and 52 that there are limitations. It's really infrastructure, which I think is important to have in page 51 and 52. I know, Joe Bullock, you also spoke to this at a prior meeting as well, that understanding limitations tries to ground certain things in reality. Would it not be, let me just play devil's advocate, would it not be a problem if we're saying here are potential opportunities just to say, here are identified limitations and just leave it at that and not say anything more about it? We're not saying we're advocating for public expansion of public sewer, which I'm not advocating for, putting in public water, but just, if we simply just list what Delia put up on the screen, does that make anything beyond just here's limitations and just be done with it? Or is there concern that we're just listing those and people might think we're advocating to change them?
If, this is the thing that we're going to the state with. And so maybe that's, by listing them on, it does show that we are different from Hartford. These are limitations that we have with the affordable housing, with this whole project. If we go ahead and list those things.
I think, like you said, a lot of people only read the conclusions. I think you're missing just a little detail to add why those are limitations. It should say limited public sewers, lack of public water, very limited public transit, that kind of thing, because they're not going to go back and read the text. They're just going to see this as an excuse.
I could live with that.
So what are you suggesting then? For example, show us for each one of A, B, C, D, D, what you would suggest. And then we can continue the discussion.
It's called the sewer district, right? With limited.
Well, or you can do the public sewer still. We have limited public sewer system.
Limited sewer availability.
Okay, so that's good.
We'll just put this wording up and then we can discuss further. Because there's still the issue about, do we want, as a commission, then we'll have to decide, put something in about limitations and not. I understand the point. If someone's only going to read the last page and we don't show, for one argument is, if we don't show some of the limitations, that becomes an issue because we want to make certain people understand the reality of Woodstock, which you're right, Mark, is different from the reality of, say, Hartford or Glastonbury or, New Haven. Yes, yep, or Tallinn, yep.
I think it's important after all these meetings that we conclude something.
Okay. So let me throw this out there then, so we can make certain we can make a decision point on it. Do we want to have something in there that says the identified limitations include, but, or not have it in? My understanding hearing from folks is that there's more people who are inclined to want to put this in than not put it in.
I'd rather not put it in.
Okay. Doug?
Yeah, I think a few of you might know that I'm a developer. I love stuff like this. This is the stuff that makes my job easy, because when I decide I want to put an affordable housing project in the center of Woodstock, I'm going to come back and say, you have to expand the sewer. I'm going to buy a parcel that's on the sewer line right now. And I'm going to tell you guys that you have to give me access to the sewer because you've said in your affordable housing plan that one of the limitations of getting affordable housing is that there's limited sewer access. So I'm going to find a parcel that's on the sewer line that's not right now connected, and I'm going to force the town of Woodstock to allow me to connect it. Because you've identified it right there that that's the reason we don't have affordable housing. So I don't know what it adds for us, but I think it has too many potential negatives to include it.
Even though we've already gone into text about it on page 51 and 52?
You've given me the opportunity to argue the reason that there's not enough affordable housing in Woodstock is that there's limited sewer availability. And now I'm going to challenge you in court and tell you that you have to provide access to your sewer for my affordable housing. And I've seen it happen in Killingly, where, you know, I think most of us would think that Killingly has a significant supply of affordable or attainable housing. And I've seen builders, developers go in and put a high density project on the sewer line because of the not having enough, per the state standard, enough affordable housing in the town of Killingly. So I think you're asking for trouble. I don't think there's, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
No, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I don't think there's any net gain for saying that, for putting these limitations in there, except giving a developer an opportunity to argue that you need to allow their affordable housing project in, and you have to provide them public water, and you have to provide them sewer availability.
I think it just gives,
I'm done.
no, I think it just gives targets for people. If we put that in their conclusion, it's just a target that those are things that people are going to say, oh, that's what you need to do.
Okay.
I mean, we talk about it in the
I'm just letting him finish. David?
We talk about it in the report, but I think putting it on there is just a bullet point for people to go in and say, oh, you need to address these issues. If we put that in the conclusion, it's like just putting a target on our back for those issues. I don't think we should have them in the conclusion.
Joe Pulick, then Joe Adelaide.
I was just going to talk to Doug. As long as you have your deed restrictions on X number of apartments, then that meets the affordable. In addition to that, you're going to have to pay a fee to hook onto the sewer line. So I don't see how that's a problem.
Joe Adelaide?
Yeah, I was going to say the same argument for not having or for including the limitations. The same argument applies to the opportunities, because someone could come in and say, all right, you've got to do address all of these opportunities and make affordable housing available.
Delia?
The state is requiring that you have a plan and
Yeah.
that you identify what you're going to do. So I think you kind of have to have your recommendations in there. You don't have to put your limitations in the conclusion if you don't want to.
Yeah.
Well, that's the real crux right now. Do we want to put it in or not put it on? So one way of resolving it is that we take a vote on it. We would have to have a motion to either include them or not include them to resolve it, which would really be the ultimate way that we would have to make it.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to include that.
Let me just write this down. So include, this would be, so just so we're clear, if you don't mind, Joe Bullock.
Include the limitations and A, B, C, D.
On page 61.
On page 61.
So it's clear where we would be putting them in. Is there a second? For the motion to include them? I want to make sure I didn't miss anybody on who may have their hand raised on Zoom. If there's no second, there's no then motion to act upon it. Okay?
Okay.
So in that case, then if we're not going to have a motion to include them, does that then mean by default we're not adding them? So they're off. Okay. We just would need to note for the record that there was a motion made, but there was no second in it. Thus the default is it's not put on. Okay, that's fine. Just so way we're clear.
I'll add that Doug and Dave had persuasive arguments.
Anything else from commissioners on this? The motion still on the table is to approve or accept the draft, which is dated 4/21/22, which we've already noted that we've made some edits to. Well, we will, but I'll note that. I just want to ask, Mark, you made the motion and Jeff, you seconded it. Unless we want separate motions, is it okay then if we just list that, accept the draft that is the version of April 21st, 2022, as has been edited with today's date? Would that be okay to clarify that motion for
Fine to
you?
go that way, or if we need to do an amendment,
Yeah, you could do an amendment.
would it be proper to just
Well,
do
you
it?
can amend the motion or you can just accept it, then that your motion would then include the edits tonight if you want to do it that way. Or we can-
Let the motion include the edits that were discussed and put in tonight.
As edited, which would be today with today's date. So it's clear. May 5th, 2022. Okay, that just makes it cleaner. Jeff, are you okay with that? Okay, that just makes it cleaner for us. Do we have still members of the public on, or was that? I don't see any now. Okay, I just wanted to make certain. I didn't see her hand was up during the time anyway. Do we have anything else on this? Again, the motion is on the table, so. Okay. With that said, that gets us to, where am I here? I'm over here. That would then to vote on the motion. I'll go through the roll. Joe Adaletta.
Aye.
Mark Blackburn.
Aye.
Sid Blodgett.
Aye.
Jeff Gordon, aye. Actually, I do have you seated, Dean. Dean Gould.
Aye.
Got there for a minute. Sorry, Dean. Jeff Marcotte. Aye. David Morse.
Aye.
Joe Palula.
Nay.
I don't have Doug seated or Dwight seated. Timothy Young.
Aye.
So that passes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That passes 8-1. I know Delia will update this and you'll put the new date on or whatever. It will no longer say draft.
Right.
We'll get, if people want Delia to mail a copy,
Final copy.
final copy out. If anybody wants an email as well, that's fine. If you don't mind also sending me an email copy. Because if I
Also
lose,
one to everybody.
yes, because that way if I lose my paper copy, I have
Right.
I have a digital one because I lose sometimes my paper for that. And then I believe we have to, well, you'll follow whatever is needed to submit.
Mhm.
And then I think we have to post the final version up on the town website where required. I think, but we should anyway.
Yeah.
So, so that way it's up there. So I will notify the Board of Selectmen that we have the updated plan.
Send them a copy.
We would send them a copy. You have their emails or you can get their official emails.
Yep.
And then we would, that way they're notified that we have done it before the June 1st deadline. It's been submitted in time. And then we go accordingly. If we get anything back from the state saying it's been received or acknowledged, we'll just note it at another meeting. I don't know what the state does. They must have
My
some.
experience, they don't respond.
Well, we'd have some way of knowing they've received it. So we'll just note it at a future meeting or at our next meeting, whenever, that they've received it.
Have they requested a hard copy or by email? Do you know?
Pretty sure they just want the digital copy.
The digital copy. All right. So you'll have a
Some
date sent.
cities, they only want digital now.
I
Okay.
believe everything they want is digital now.
Okay.
So, but I'll look to see here. Let me just pull up the, do I have that, oh, it may have. You'll look to see, because I know in that statute that got changed, it said what you needed to do, which is more, you got to send it into this agency.
Yep.
I don't think there was much else. It's just, you got to meet this deadline, basically. So, okay. All right, everybody.
Well, I just want to add that I think Delia did a great job in pulling this together between the surveys, the narratives in here, the data. Very nice work, and I think it'll represent us well for the state report.
Yes, and thank you very much, Delia. And just to remind everybody, the work that's been done on this, as far as how it gets paid for, is going to be coming out of that POCD fund.
Yep.
Because anything we did here is valid for us moving forward whenever we need to get into the POCD update, which is going to be a project at some point coming up on the calendar. We've already done some groundwork. We can always expand it as a sense of any updated data or things like that. But this is work that is towards POCD in a sense. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can just move farther down the road. So, and that's already been set with the Board of Finance and the Director of Finance's office. Since we're done with Affordable Housing Plan update, that takes us to agenda item 5. Commissioner Young usually has something to say about agenda item 5.
Move to adjourn.
Motion by Young, seconded by Blackner to adjourn the meeting. I'll go through the roll. Joe Adeletto.
Aye.
Mark Blackner. Aye. Sid Blodgett.
Aye.
Jeff Gordon, aye. Dean Gould.
Aye.
Jeff Markov. David Morris.
Aye.
Timothy Young. I believe that passes unanimously.
All right.
We are adjourned whatever time you have. 9:07.